everyone, this is the July tutorial video for Kawaii Craft Kits. This is the very first time that I'm doing a two-part resin kit for Kawaii Craft Kits. So let's see what we got in the box and then we'll jump into the tutorials. So the main ingredient, or like the main supply of the box, is the resin itself, and this is two-part resin. It's a 3-to-1 mix ratio, so there's 150 milliliters of the bigger bottle and then 50 of the smaller bottle. This pink sheet looking thing is actually a silicone mat, and this is going to be our work surface when we're using the two-part resin. This is a reusable mixing cup. It's a little bit hard to tell on camera, but it does have measurements on the side, and it is silicone, so it's easy to clean and is reusable. To go along with that, we have popsicle sticks, and so we'll use these to mix the resin. Now we have some molds. So there's a few molds in this box. This first one is a gem-shaped mold, and it's faceted, and it does stand on its own once it's cured. These two molds here go together, and so one is a cube mold and then the other is a mountain peak mold, and so the mountain peak mold is actually double-sided, but once you cure the mountain peak inside of it, you can take it out and it'll fit inside the cube mold. These two bottles are resin, pigment, or alcohol ink, and so there is a opaque light blue color and then a more translucent darker blue color. Next we have a product by Solar Color Dust, and so this is their glow dust and it's in the color Invisible Aqua. This is a set of iridescent film, and so I already used some colors because this is my own personal set, but this is a bonus item for my subscribers. And then this is the illustrated button of the month by J.Grove. It's really cute jellyfish, which leads me on to the next item, which are really cute miniature jellyfish, and they come in test tubes. And then here's kind of like a close-up of what they look like, and we will be embedding these inside the resin. And then the very last item is the insert that comes with every month, and so we have a brochure with an illustration, some example project steps, what supplies were included, tips and tricks, and all of that. So yeah. Alright, let's jump into the tutorials. There'll be two projects in this video that I show you how to make, and of course these are just what I came up with. Please feel free to use your own freedom if you receive this box, and so we'll start by opening up the resin. So please wear gloves whenever you work with resin. I use disposable ones. You also need to work in a well-ventilated area, and I also recommend wearing a face ventilator or a face mask, and I do not recommend kids working with resin. So once you remove the seals on the resin, you'll be able to put the cap back on, and then we will be mixing up our first batch of resin. And so for this one, I'm using my silicone mixing cup. And so for the first part A, I'm going to be pouring out 30 milliliters, and this is a 3-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to pour out 30 milliliters from the larger bottle, and then I'm going to be measuring out 10 milliliters from the smaller bottle, so it'll be a total of 40 milliliters. So next I'm going to mix up the two parts together, and so I mix it up for 2 minutes using the popsicle stick. Obviously I'm going to speed it up for the purpose of this video. But yeah, and then once it's all mixed together, I like to let it sit for maybe like 5 or 10 minutes just so some bubbles can rise to the top, and then I'm going to pop those with a lighter, which is not included in the kit, but I buy mine from my local convenience store or gas station. Yeah, lighter. And then you can also use like a toothpick to kind of like pop bubbles, or you can use a straw to blow on top of the resin. But I find that the lighter is the fastest and most effective method. So yeah, you might see me popping bubbles with the lighter. So if you see the lighter in the video, that's what I'm doing. Only wave it on top of the resin for like a few seconds, or like if that, even like 1 second, because the resin can actually burn a little bit. I've had it happen to me, which is not good because it creates like fumes, and also because, you know, it leaves behind a residue. So yeah, only like a little bit. Yeah. So here I laid out the jellyfish. on top of the silicone mat that we're working on. And now I'm taking some resin from the cup and the popsicle stick, and I'm dripping it onto each of the jellyfish and making like a strand or a line. And you'll see kind of like why this makes sense a bit later, but basically I want to be able to, once it cures, to be able to peel the jellyfish off the mat and have them kind of like embedded in some resin line already. So yeah, it'll make more sense in a bit. And so with the remaining resin, I'm pouring it into the gem mold, and I'm not filling it up all the way because I kind of want to do this in 2 parts. So first I'm going to add resin. Yeah, duh. But anyway, this resin is going to take about 24 hours to cure, both the strands we just created and then the resin we poured in here. So I'm gonna let the resin sit for a little bit. Here I am with the torch action, popping bubbles. And then I'm going to use the pigment dyes, and so when you first open the pigment dyes, you'll have to cut off a little bit of the nozzle, nozzle, right? In order for the ink to flow out. So I'm just adding a few drops of the opaque blue and then of the more translucent blue. And you don't want to add too many, and you don't want to mix it in too much if you want the effect that I'm going for, which is kind of like an ink spill, or if you look on Instagram or on other YouTube videos, you can find similar techniques by looking for resin petri dishes. And there's a lot of great like resources for both free and paid for this technique, because it is very I'd say it takes a lot of trial and error to kind of master. I'll go over some tips and tricks that I found at the very end of this video. But yeah, this ink will slowly start to go down into the mold, and don't push it down with toothpick. I did that because I was worried that it wasn't falling fast enough, but then that actually spread the resin around too much and kind of colored the whole thing blue. So yeah, just wait and be patient. It'll do its thing. One thing that I do like doing is to use the toothpick to spread the resin just on the surface, and so that it kind of like coats the entire surface, but don't like push it down. You can create some effects that way probably. I just found that for me it ended up muddying the water too much. So after patiently waiting over 24 hours, we're going to do the next pour. And so to prepare for the next pour, I'm going to peel off the jellyfish from the silicone mat, as well as all the drips that I accidentally did onto the mat. So yeah, see how easy the drips come off? Yeah, you don't want to get these drips anywhere else. Trust me, I got resin drips on my dad's kitchen counter years ago, and he still brings it up to this day about how I ruined his kitchen counters. So yeah, that's also why you don't let kids, use resin. One of the reasons. But anyway, so for the jellyfish, I'm just using scissors. You can also use like a craft knife to cut them as thin as possible without cutting into the jellyfish. And then I accidentally chopped off the tops of them a little bit too much for my liking, because later you'll see me add some to the top using UV resin. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. So then I'm cutting them based on how I want them to be positioned inside the mold. So I like to cut them to different lengths from each other, just so they're more like staggered looking. And so yeah, just like put them into the mold, make sure they're the right length that you want, and then trim off any excess or make them shorter as to your liking. So then position them inside the mold the way that you want them to be. I like to spread them out. And then once you're done with the placement, I'm going to go ahead and pour some more resin into it. And I did this off camera, but I mixed together some resin. I believe I mixed together about 100 milliliters total ish, and you always want to make more resin than is necessary, because I always have lots of molds on hand to pour excess resin into in case I have extra resin. And we'll see in a minute that the square mold and the mountain molds are good molds as well to pour any excess that you might have. So then this is when I needed to do surgery, emergency surgery on the jellyfish, because I realized that I cut them too short on the tops, and so they were kind of like slipping inside of the mold. And so if you leave enough like on the top to where it's actually poking out of the mold, it's easier to get them to be more grounded, to be more stable, and you can like move them around from outside of the mold. And so I actually fished them out of the resin, dried them off a little bit, and then I applied UV resin to the tops and then made them longer that way, and then I put them back in. And then the next step is to add the alcohol ink, and so you want to make sure your placement of the jellyfish is the way you want it before you add the ink, because if you try to move around the jellyfish after, it will mix in the ink a bit to the resin, and it might end up mixing it to where it's more like it dyed the entire resin instead of creating like the ink spill effect that we're going for. So yeah. And so I just applied not too many drops. I applied like 5 of the darker blue, and then I applied some of the opaque blue on top of that, and then I waited for it to do its thing. You'll see later some examples of pieces I made where I added way too many drops and what happened as a result. So yeah, try to keep it simple, as well as I didn't want to add too much because I wanted to make sure that the jellyfish stayed visible. If there's too much dye, it might color it so much that the jellyfish kind of get lost, or it becomes a bit cloudy. So that's another reason why I added only a few drops. So then after waiting another 24 hours, or over 24 hours if you want to be on the safe side, it's ready to demold. And so for this mold, it's easiest to fold the mold down onto itself in order to demold it. So that's what I'm doing here. And then it's also handy, once you have the mold off, to clean it, because it is inside out, so you'll be able to clean the inside. And so I just use some baby wipes sometimes, or I'll use like a Q-tip with some baby oil to clean off any like excess resin or any dye that might have gone onto the mold. And so then one of the final steps is to cut away the excess from the jellyfish strands, I guess that's what we're calling them, with an X-Acto knife. And so I'm just trimming those away. And then the very final step is I'm going to pour a layer of resin on top of it, because the top kind of has an uneven divot, like indentation. Using words I never used before in daily conversation. Anyway, and so I'm actually going to be using UV resin for this, because I can pour it on top and then it cures in minutes, and I want to get this video up. I don't want to wait another 24 hours. But you can also use AB resin for this, or AB resin or 2-part resin for this as well. So then after that, we're done with this project. And so here's how mine turned out with all the ink spills. You can see the jellyfish in there, and it's really cool looking, guys. I just love the ink spill like method or petri dish. I'm definitely gonna have to experiment more. I'll post some more creations on my Instagram, so yeah, look out for that. Okay, so then we're gonna do another project, and I'm gonna show you actually two different projects for this cube mold and mountain mold. So starting with this one, this is just some blue resin that I poured into the mountain mold. Sorry, I did it off camera. But yeah, so this is what it turned out after I waited 24 hours. I just mixed in a few drops of the blue pigments inside resin and then poured it, and then now I am setting it inside the cube mold. And then also off camera, because apparently I am the worst. So I poured in some resin to fill the rest of the cube mold, and just clear resin. And then I'm using some of that iridescent film and adding it. And so I'm cutting it into strips using scissors, or actually more like little flakes, I'd say, little flakes. And then I'm adding that to the resin. Honestly, I wish I added more, because I think it would have created a really cool effect if I added a whole bunch. But yeah, and then after I add that, I'm going to let that cure and then pop it out. And then the second cube project that I did was I made a mountain peak mold, and I mixed in the solar color dust, glow dust. And I'm sorry I lost the footage for that, but I just mixed in some solar color dust, the glow dust, to the resin and poured it into the mountain peak mold. And then I put the mountain peak inside the cube mold and poured clear resin to finish it off. And then here is what both of the cube mold projects look like. And then here's what the cube mold with glow-in-the-dark powder looks like, you know, glowing in the dark, in the dark. So yeah, I think it's a really cool effect. You can see the mountain peaks a bit easier once it's glow in the dark. It kind of looks, you can kind of tell a little bit in the daylight, but it really comes alive at night, if you will. It's nocturnal, I guess. So yeah, I should just stop talking, but okay guys, so these are all of the projects I made for this month's kit, both when I was like testing materials and then preparing for this tutorial video, making this tutorial video. So yeah, it's a lot, and I learned a lot of, you know, tips and tricks and things to avoid. So we're gonna go over a little bit now. And these tips and things to avoid are specifically about using alcohol inks and resin, as well as the other supplies for this kit. And so one of the first things I found out right off the bat was that the glow powder, once you mix it into the resin, the glow powder will kind of inhibit the alcohol ink from spreading and creating those ink spills. So that's what happened in these two pieces shown here. And then here are some cubes that I created. I actually use an ice cube mold for these. Also, do not use a mold that you've used for resin to like eat from, or like in this case make ice from. Yeah, just designate it as a crafting only mold. Anyway, so here I want to show you this kind of like weird bubble effect that happened. So the resin ended up kind of like, whoop, okay. The resin ended up pulling in these weird like bubbly forms from the bottom of the mold, and honestly I'm still researching this. If you know why this happened, please let me know exactly, but my theory is that I added too much ink into the pieces or something of that nature. And then this piece here, which I didn't end up, or I didn't finish trimming because I didn't like the way it turned out, shows what happens if you mix too much ink and with the jellyfish, and you can tell that the jellyfish become almost lost. You can kind of see them poking out from areas, but this is what happens when I tried to mess with the placement too much after dropping the ink inside the mold, or the resin. So I'm going to point out a couple things I learned from these making these smaller pieces. One being that if you drop ink inside a smaller piece, it will sink to the bottom very fast. And so that's what happened to these. It actually created kind of a cool eyeball effect. So I'm actually, whoop, okay, one eyeball rolled off. But yeah, you can tell that the ink on this piece too sunk to the bottom. And so that's just something to look out for. You can also wait after you pour the resin for a while so that the resin like hardens a little bit, and so once you add the ink it'll drop slower, but I'm not like a master at the timing or anything, so there's that to keep in mind as well. And then I could create a whole other video about white alcohol ink as it relates to effects in resin, but if you decide to get some white alcohol ink, you can create lots of cool effects. However, you just have to keep in mind that the white alcohol ink, like the other inks, will sink to the bottom, and then white alcohol ink has a tendency to create pretty like opaque splatters or blotches onto the bottoms. So if we flip these over, we can see that. And you know, sometimes it's kind of cool, like this star I like. I think the pink bear is a little bit too much though. You can sand this off, I've heard, but I haven't tried that yet. But yes, so just keep that in mind as well if you decide to venture into more alcohol ink practices. And so that is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope this was really helpful, both for my subscribers who are looking to make their projects from their box, as well as anyone interested in alcohol ink techniques and resin. It is a very interesting craft method that I want to explore more. But anyway, thanks again so much for watching. I'm going to leave you guys with a little sneak peek of the next box, which is the August Deco Din box. And signups for this in July 31st and 2019, when I'm the year that I'm recording this video. I don't know if anyone's gonna be watching this past 2019, but anyway, these are little sneak peeks of the August box. You can find out more information on my Instagram and by signing up for the newsletter on the website, which will be in the description bio. I call it bio on Instagram, but I guess it's a description box on YouTube. Yeah, so thank you again for watching. I think this is the third time I said that. And I will see you guys in the next video.